Good afternoon and welcome to the Engineering Roundtable. This is Roundtable number 6. My name is JP Delplanque. I serve as Vice Provost and Dean at the University of California, Davis, and I'm also a professor of mechanical and aerospace engineering. We'll start with introductions. In the interest of time, what I'll do is I'll mention our fellows and ask them to wave. I'll just give a very limited information, and then we can ask all the questions that we have about their research. And I'll try to go alphabetically. Margaret Code, research focus on Vine robots. You probably just saw a presentation. She is at Stanford in mechanical engineering. Alana Cooney, here you go. Her research focus is thermal storage batteries in HVAC systems. She's at UC Berkeley in mechanical engineering. Zoe Canavas, hello. Her research focus is on flow through granular porous media. She's at UC Davis and in civil and environmental engineering. Robin Peter, hello. Her research focuses on alpha particle cancer therapy. She's at UC Berkeley in nuclear engineering. Jack Ruth. Hi, Jack. His research focus is on enzyme electrode interface for bioenergy at Stanford in chemical engineering. Nathan Stacy. Nathan is research focus is on autonomous nanosatellite swarming. Is at Stanford in aeronautics and astronautics. And I think I covered everybody who is present. We may have another fellow join us, and I'll introduce that person when they show up. I'd like to start with, so you can ask, for those of you who are attending, looking at the roundtable on the website, you can ask questions through the chat function, questions from the audience, and I'll relay them to our fellows. They're also looking at it at the same time as I am. And I'd like to start with an opening question, and you know, the question that I cannot not ask, which is related to how your research has been impacted by the pandemic. Now that we're a year into it, I think it would be interesting for everyone to hear about the challenges that you faced, how you've adapted, who has helped you, or what has helped you in addressing those. So I don't necessarily want to go around, although we'll probably end up doing that. Whoever wants to chime in, please go ahead, and then we'll take it from there.
Hi, I'd be happy to start.
Go ahead.
So fortunately for me, my research is very computational, and I do everything from a computer. So the biggest impact that I experienced during the pandemic was actually moving my desk from Gowsey Hall at UC Davis into my home and getting a 2-bedroom apartment instead of a 1. But the challenges I faced, I think, are pretty common. Mental health struggles. It's really hard to continue to be motivated when you roll out of bed and you walk 10 feet over to your office. So having a really good level of communication with my advisor has been great. So they know what to expect of me, and yeah, I think that's it.
Thank you. Who else would like to chime in on this? Maybe somebody who does experimental work. I'd like to hear about that too.
I can talk about that. So I think the biggest impact was, you know, in the very initial phase of the pandemic, when we had kind of a long shutdown where we were forced to be out of lab. And I think the silver lining in there for me was being forced to not do experiments for a couple months. I kind of took a step back and then focused on doing more, working on like a prospective review paper type thing, which really gave me a good kind of background understanding of the field that I work in, as well as how my research can better impact further research down the road. And then I think kind of the biggest challenge has been because there are fewer social things going on, it's much harder to have a work-life balance now, because it's very easy to just kind of work late into the night and then wake up and start working again the next morning without kind of any break.
Yeah, I think that's something that everybody can relate to right now. And thank you for bringing up the silver linings part of it, because I didn't mention that in my question. And I think that's important also to look at things positively. So those of us who follow, if you want to add to that aspect of it, that would be useful as well. Who would like to chime in?
I can talk a little bit about experiments. So I'm actually doing a project at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. And so I've actually been coming into the lab almost every day since the beginning of September to do experiments. And so I've been really lucky in terms of getting access to the lab. But there's definitely been some challenges. The biggest one definitely just being that there's no one else here. And so, you know, it's just kind of me alone in a room. Sometimes I'll see one or two other people around. And so another problem with that is that in terms of learning, it's, you know, I kind of have to figure out everything myself, as opposed to having a lot of other people here to ask, you know, how do I build this? How do I do this? And so it's been both challenging, but also rewarding, because I've been kind of forced to learn and do a lot of things that I probably wouldn't have otherwise. And so that's been really great. But there's also other challenges. There's rules like I'm not allowed to work within 6 feet of any other person at any time. And so unless we put on respirators, which we don't do. And so, you know, looking at an electrical cabinet and trying to figure out, you know, which fuse goes where with another person is really hard, because we're both standing 6 feet back. So there's been a lot of unique challenges, but overall it's been a good learning experience. Yeah,
I imagine that. Anyone else wants to relate their experience? I think that's valuable. I'm looking at the chat. I don't see any questions so far, so we can keep going.
I can just chime in really quick. So a lot of my work is computational in nature, running simulations on a computer, but I also do some work with a robotic test bed. So yeah, initially that was a little tricky, not being able to access the lab space and the robotic test bed, but it's been great for many months now, having access and just a limited number of people in there at a time. Going back to like the silver lining with the pandemic, the one thing that's been really nice is the flexibility to just work remotely. So I did an internship with NASA Goddard last summer and doing another internship this coming summer. And so it's been really nice to be able to just work remotely, because my wife is studying to be a physician assistant also here at Stanford. And so it would have been, you know, really unfortunate to have to be physically separated with commitments in different places, but it's been great to be able to just work remotely. So that's also one plus of the pandemic, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can jump in similarly. So for me, I do experimental work in the lab. So when our lab got shut down, I had to stay, I couldn't do the work I was planning to do. But I did get to go to visit my family in Illinois and spend a lot of time with them, which was awesome. And I ended up delaying my work, but it was actually the ARCS fellowship that allowed me to like have an extra year in grad school. This is my last year. So it allowed me to come back and finish and have more time to work on projects that got delayed. And then in the meantime, we actually got a new piece of equipment in our lab. And so I was able to switch projects to work with that. And another silver lining is I applied for faculty positions last year, but didn't get a job. And then I had another opportunity to apply again this year, and I just accepted a faculty position. So that's exciting.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Would you like to share where you're going?
Yeah, I'm going to be at the University of Notre Dame in Indiana.
Wow. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Congratulations. That's awesome. From my perspective, so this is my first year as a graduate student, actually. So I came in and I started my work during the pandemic. So that's kind of affected a couple things for me. The first one was selection of what project I'm working on. And it's in itself kind of a silver lining as well. The project I ended up picking in light of the circumstances is mostly computational, which, you know, medical physics tends to be fairly computational, but in a nuclear engineering program, you also tend to want to design an experiment and work with something. So I'm hoping that as, you know, vaccines are rolling out, that I'll be able to actually set up some kind of device and start working on that in the future. But kind of the silver lining there for me has been this particular project that I'm working on is in collaboration with a professor at the University of Colorado, and it gets data from the University of Washington, and like it's this really kind of interdisciplinary collaboration that probably wouldn't have happened for me just as like a student at Berkeley if we weren't actively looking for things that would be possible during this time. So that's been pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's a sense of those silver linings not being sustainable too long, right? I mean, it delays things, it allows for opportunities, maybe with the exception of Margaret, and then it has to stop. I think that's where we all are. There's actually a question from the audience here, from Scott, and the question, I guess you all see it. It says, despite social distancing, have you been able to discuss science with your peers and find other sources of guidance that otherwise happen naturally and in person? Again, jump in, whoever wants to address that.
Yeah, so at Berkeley, I was also like, as a first year grad student, looking for ways to connect with people since I didn't know anyone here. And there's a program here it's a Society for Graduate Women in Engineering. Mm-hmm. And also one within the nuclear engineering department. And that was super helpful for me my first semester. It was just, you know, monthly meetings or so with another like graduate student mentor. And we got to just kind of chat about whatever happened to be the matters at hand that day, whether that was, you know, the struggles of starting up the research, or, you know, what's your favorite citation manager, or just things on how to get the wheels turning. So I think those kinds of programs were particularly helpful during this time for me.
Right. Yeah, it's a different experience when you come in and you have to establish a network from scratch, essentially, or almost from scratch. I'm glad to hear that you were able to do that, because that must have been a challenge. How difficult has it been for those of you who already had an established network to keep maintaining that network? Anyone wants to share about that?
Yeah, so I have a similar experience. I am a third-year graduate student, but in my program, we have a society, the Society of Water and Environmental Graduate Students that I'm a part of. And we've been working really hard to make sure that students are still able to connect with each other, whether that be socially, like weekly game nights, or we even hosted a conference last Friday where we invited professionals from all over California. Normally would be in person, but we were still able to have those connections. The other way that I've been maintaining my network is actually taking advantage of conferences that are online. They may suck sometimes because they're really draining to sit in front of your computer all day, but I have met some amazing connections, and I'm even interning with one at USGS this summer. So it's been hard, but with determination and attending these events, it's been doable.
Yeah. Yeah, Jack, I think you wanted, I saw you. Yeah, there.
Yeah, so I agree with what Zoe said. I think that especially with conferences, it's been great because something that might not have been reachable is easily possible now, because you can just, you know, log onto your computer. I think on one hand, the pandemic and shifting everything onto Zoom has actually been really helpful with keeping connections for people that have moved away, maybe like to other postdocs or professorships or things like that. One of the more challenging things for me is in trying to talk to people that are typically busier, like maybe professors. There are a few people in my network that are oftentimes hard to catch via email, but it was always kind of a saving grace that you could catch them in their office. So now that we're remote, that's no longer a possibility. So it's been at times interesting trying to keep on top of that.
Yeah, I think that's actually my experience too. When you work in an environment where you used to pop your head in, you know, on somebody's desk, which is what you've experienced with your colleagues, but also with the mentors, that's not happening anymore, and it's very difficult to replace. I mean, I think that everybody can relate to that. Anyone else would like to add to this?
Yeah, I can jump in. So a nice thing that my lab has been doing is we have a lab Slack channel, so we can kind of jump in and send each other a quick message to ask the kinds of things that you would pop your head in and say. So that's good. And we do have our lab meeting virtually on Zoom, and I've had lab mates Slack me and ask me like, oh, can you hop on Zoom really quick to answer your question or discuss something. But more recently, our lab is able to have 8 people at once, which is really nice because we have a large lab space. And so we're able to get back to some of the fun in-person conversations like we used to have.
Yeah, things are changing really quickly right now on all campuses, almost daily, actually, in terms of what's possible and what's not possible. And I think it's both exciting and also it requires quite a bit of planning. So I do have a question about that, but I want to make sure that everybody who wanted to chime in on the previous one has had an opportunity. No? Okay, maybe we can come back to that. The question I had was related actually to this ramping up, right? So all of you are in some phase of ramping up. Clearly, compared to a year ago, you are. I, without putting words in your mouth, I imagine there's some excitement related to that, right? To be finally back to campus, or maybe on campus for the first time, but also some anticipation. So with all the caveats that you voiced about the difficulty of working remotely, I mean, I really connecting also with the work-life balance. You know, you can't balance work and life if you essentially don't have a life, is what one of you were saying. But there is also maybe some things that you were able to do in terms of the way you were meshing it. So is there also any challenges that you expect in terms of getting back to what is a more in-person experience with your research and the way you handle your academics?
Yeah, personally, it's a very personal note, but I feel there will be some difficulty in casually chatting with people again. That's a concern I kind of have. But it is going to be difficult to work for 8 hours a day again, as opposed to all the time, and actually separating my life from my work, or figuring out what life is. Again, not to be so somber about it, but I do anticipate that being a challenge of how to collaborate again and how to step away from a project. Right now, you can always keep going, but when we get back in person, we'll need to change that a little bit.
Yeah, I could completely see that. Who would like to add to this? Anyone has pets? Oh, sorry, Helena, you were going to chime in. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to, kind of on a similar note, like I'm a little bit afraid of the next in-person conference that I have to present at, just because I haven't had to, talk in front of real physical people in such a long time. I'm worried that I've, lost what little public speaking skills I had. And so that's definitely like a point of anxiety for me, is kind of, getting back and teaching in the classroom or presenting in front of people.
Yeah. Oh, actually, that's a good point. Have any of you had to be or got to be a teaching assistant or do some sort of instruction during this past year? How did that work out? Well, how did you? I mean, there was a lot of steep learning curve going on with that process.
Yeah, I
actually.
Go ahead, Robin.
Okay. Well, I was just going to say that, despite the obvious challenges, I actually found screen share to be a really, really helpful tool in being a TA. And so I don't know, I'm just going to miss that personally.
And Alana, you were going to add something, I think.
Yeah, so I was a TA this past summer, and so it was like kind of right at the beginning, and it was pretty difficult at first, just having to monitor the chat and also like presenting and then trying to write on a tablet to explain concepts. It was difficult to juggle everything. Yeah. And especially I didn't have an iPad when I first started teaching, and so I was trying to use this little stylus tool that didn't really work. And so a lot of it was just having the resources to be able to teach was a big deal.
I really relate to that, Elena. I also bought an iPad/tablet over the course of the pandemic. I've had the opportunity to TA twice, once in spring of 2020, so right at the get-go, and then in the winter quarter, winter 2020, and or winter 2021. The comparison between the two, it got a lot easier. People got a lot more used to sharing their thoughts online. At first, there was a lot of hesitancy to unmute yourself and ask questions online. There was just that awkwardness there. But at the end, everyone's talking over each other. So I found the students were really able to adapt to the online space very quickly. And that's something I'm very thankful for, the resiliency of my students. But also, screen share has been very important for debugging students' code for homework assignments.
Well, actually, that's a good point that we touched upon a little bit at the beginning. We're talking about the silver linings, but looking at the skills acquired as part of the way we do things. I sort of implied before that once we're back in person, it would be back to where we were before. I think everybody agrees that things are going to change because of the new skills that we have and the ability that we have to interact with one another. Can you project, things that you may actually end up doing that you didn't do before? So maybe it's hybrid meetings, right? Or anything along those lines?
Yeah, I anticipate hybrid meetings being a normal part of our future. I think even for the planning of the American Geophysical Union conference that happens in December, it will happen in December 2021 now, that's planning to be a hybrid format. And that's really great because it increases the accessibility. Some students aren't able to get funding to fly out to San Francisco or Chicago or wherever these conferences may be. And that is something I anticipate, more accessibility or at least recordings of meetings so you can see them afterwards. I was able to attend a meeting at Penn State yesterday from Davis, California, because it was recorded. So I anticipate that being a big part of our future.
All right. Any other aspect that you think, skills that you've learned over the past year that will carry and help you do things slightly differently than you would have otherwise?
This isn't exactly a skill that I have learned personally, but I do think that professors teaching courses may opt to record their lectures more often in coming semesters. I think that proved to be a really useful tool for students, whether they had to miss lecture for another class or a meeting, or just found it useful to review lectures before an exam. I know there was a lot of feedback from students that those things were really quite useful. So I do hope that professors will, when they have the technology available, will continue to do so. Yeah,
that's an active debate right now. I think it's going to depend on individual. The teaching on Zoom, as some of you have experienced, is one skill set. Teaching in a classroom and streaming at the same time is a slightly different skill set. And so there are challenges associated with that as well. But I agree with you that the feedback that we've gotten is exactly what you said in terms of the better access that it provided to lecture notes, lectures themselves, actually. Any other comments on that particular question? No? Yeah, I started to ask before and I stopped, but I'll ask it anyway because, well, it relates to my experience. One of the challenges we're going to have is our pets got used to us being there all the time. And, now we have to deal with, I'm partially back in person and we got to figure this out, right? How that's going to work. If you happen to be living with family or you have roommates or things like that, the way you've adapted to life during the pandemic, is part also of getting back. How do you see, so we talked about the impact that it had on you personally. I'm interested also in, and I think it's interesting to consider a slightly different question, a slightly different twist is what do you think is going to be the impact on your field, right? On your area of research, and so I'd just like to hear that, right? If you think about the way your personal research has been going and you try to extrapolate to what you may have seen at conferences or meetings that you've attended, can you see an impact there, or is it going to be, we essentially stayed on the same trajectory?
I think coming off of something Robin mentioned earlier, there's going to be a lot more collaborative work going forward with online meetings and online collaborations or over the phone. I think that has increased a lot over this past year, and it's been very beneficial to my research, just sharing data sets even. So I anticipate that to be the biggest change in our field. Hopefully it stays that way at least.
Yeah.
Specifically for the medical physics field, I know that during this time it's been rather difficult to get clinical data because clinics are focused on generally something else for the most part. And so I'm hoping that as we start to return to so-called normal times, that more projects will be able to continue as they were, and perhaps ideas that people have been marinating on for about a year will be able to actually start collecting data and talking to patients.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point for anything that, in fact, I think that most researches that involved research projects that involved human subjects had, every type of research has a different type of impact. So human subject was actually one, the field research that requires a field study also, they've had a very different type of impact on their progress than people that do numerical analysis like I do, for instance. Anyone else want to, and if you want to raise your hand, do that too. You all know how to use Zoom, so go ahead, Jack.
Yeah, so I think for my field of kind of using microbiology for engineering purposes, it's a pretty niche field. So typically there would only be maybe 2 conferences a year where people from around the world, around the country would come together and discuss the research. And I think during the pandemic, because things have been switching to Zoom, there's been a lot more of a shift towards informal kind of research sharing, where people will just give talks of what they're working on, but they're accessible to people around the world. And I think that will have a big impact in kind of speeding up the progress in research, because rather than only seeing, the perfectly polished final product of somebody's project, we're seeing a lot more of kind of the troubleshooting going on and how that could apply to different areas, or having experts from multiple locations being able to chime in on, how to solve a particular problem.
Right.
Yeah, I can chime in. So one of the areas of research that I'm involved in is remote telepresence with robots. So like, imagine I wanted to reach out and touch you, or like shake your hand from where I am, and you're like thousands of miles away. How can we do that with technology? And that's something that we have been working on in the robotics field for a while, but I think now with COVID, it has definitely come more into the public's mind, and maybe that'll result in more opportunities for funding for that type of research.
Right. Yeah, the visibility of it, of various applications, that has been pretty broad, especially in engineering, whether or not it's actually directly connected with a health application. And yeah, there is hope that funding is going to be impacted in a positive way because of that. Other comments?
Yeah, one thing I'm really interested. So I do research on energy systems, and a lot of it is heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems for buildings. And so I'm really interested, with COVID, there's been all these studies in terms of like healthy amounts of air changes in a building to make sure, all the virus is flushed out and things like that. And so obviously when you increase ventilation in a building, you're increasing the energy usage, which is going to have a huge impact on energy usage throughout the world. And so I'm really interested to see how codes change and how those requirements change and how that's going to impact building systems.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Any other comments on that? Let's maybe get to a more extrapolation type of questions. So I have two possible questions here. Either where do you think your field is going to be in the next 5 to 10 years? And we touched on that. So you get to pick the question you want to answer. It's either that or where will you be in the next 5 to 10 years? And we know Margaret knows. But for me, actually, that's probably the one we should start with. So I'll let you pick it up. And we probably have, I think we have a few minutes left. So we'll see how far we get it. We take it, I'm sorry.
Well, this is perfect because I have my qualifying exam next week. So I've been rehearsing this, where am I going to be in 5 to 10 years? And personally, I want to continue professional research science, whether that be in a national lab or as a faculty at a university. I haven't yet figured out if I just like teaching because it's what I know and I've been in school all my life, or if I really just love the research. So that's what my plan is. My field in the next 5 to 10 years will be, I think, a lot more focused on how to integrate numerical simulations into core scale experiments.
Mm-hmm.
They're really present right now, but just with how much computation power is advancing, I imagine it to be a lot more commonplace at larger and larger scales.
Of course. Who wants to chime in next?
So I expect in 5 to 10 years that I'll still be involved in research of some sort. I think it will either be research and development in industry or some type of academic research that's probably very closely tied to industrial technology. In terms of my field, looking at kind of the interface of bio and energy, I think that there's a lot of rapid development in that field now. And as we shift towards renewable energies and renewable technologies, I expect that we'll probably see kind of an exponential growth in the number of successful biotech companies as a result of that aren't just in pharma.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go around the screen now. Alana.
Yeah, so for 5 to 10 years for me personally, I came from industry back to school, and so I'm planning to teach and continue to do some research as well. And I'm very interested in applied research. And so where I see my field of, kind of building heating and cooling systems, right now I'm trying to take a lot of the data I've collected and use machine learning to create model predictive controls so that we can have smart buildings, smart grids, have everything interface with each other to reduce energy usage. And so I definitely see that kind of picking up where we have, these very integrated control systems that can minimize energy usage.
Right, yeah, thank you. Robin?
Yeah, so 5 to 10 years still seems like a long ways away for me. But I mean, that's one of the things that I'm trying to figure out as I make my way through grad school, is determining kind of whether I want to go through the more professional or academic research path for nuclear engineering and medical physics, or if I would want to perhaps pursue a medical physics residency after grad school. So I mean, both of them involve research, but one involves interacting significantly more with patients themselves and doing hospital research. Mm-hmm. So I'm hoping to take a class that involves shadowing medical residents in order to kind of gauge that. As for the field I'm in, I'm also still kind of learning about it and assessing it. But one of the things I think that people are starting to consider is the cost effectiveness and the different niches for heavy ion therapies mm-hmm. versus like conventional therapies versus targeted therapies. Proton beam therapy is pretty popular and pretty hyped up right now, but in terms of a cost standpoint, the machines that are being used are not being used a lot. because it's quite expensive and you have to stick a patient next to a big cyclotron beam line, and it's not going to get that much cheaper. And I think in light of that, targeted therapies like alpha therapy, if people can figure out how to develop radionuclides in a cost-effective production manner, will become more central focus of research.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. Margaret, I mean, I don't want to guess what your answer is. I want you to say it.
Sure. So yeah, probably 5 years from now, I will still be a professor at Notre Dame. Probably 10 years from now. I mean, I hope I love it and I'll still be a professor there 10 years from now. But yeah, I'm excited about running my own research lab and teaching the next generation of students about mechanical engineering and robotics. And I think the field of robotics has a lot of interesting directions, one of which is new AI algorithms that will make robots smarter. And then another one is new ways of thinking about how to design the bodies of robots so they can be more capable. And all of these things are kind of moving towards making robots really useful for people, making them low cost enough to be in our homes or to be readily accessible, and really making an impact on human life.
All right, thank you. Nathan.
So I have about a year and a half left in my PhD, and my research is focused on spacecraft navigation. And as I mentioned earlier, I did an internship with NASA Goddard in Maryland last summer, and really enjoyed it. Really enjoyed what I got to work on. And so yeah, my plan is to work for NASA Goddard full time after I graduate. And yeah, I think there's like lots of really interesting trends with space right now, like more involved work with private companies. There's also trends as far as like using smaller spacecraft, using multiple spacecraft to accomplish a mission, which is something that my lab in particular focuses on. So I think those trends will continue. I'm pretty excited for like upcoming stuff that the specific NASA center I'll be working at is getting involved in. They have an upcoming asteroid mission they're working on. They're working on the current one to Bennu that a sample is being returned from right now. They also work on the James Webb Space Telescope going up soon. So lots of really cool projects that hopefully I can get my hands into in the future as well. So.
Right, that sounds exciting. Well, thank you, all of you, for your work and for participating in this. It was fascinating, and have a good rest of the academic year, at least. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.